3 bullets. That's all it took to shatter the silence of a lonely highway and seal the fate of 2 arrogant officers. They thought they had just taken out a problem. They thought their badges were shields of invincibility that would let them get away with murder. They were wrong. Dead wrong. Because the woman they targeted wasn't just a random driver. She was the Honorable Judge Evelyn Vance, one of the most powerful women in the state. And she wasn't dead. What happens when the victim you left for dead walks into your courtroom 20 minutes later, wearing her robes and holding the gavel? You are about to witness the most satisfying instant karma in legal history. Buckle up. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the asphalt of Route 9 into a slick black mirror. It was just past 8:00 a.m. on a Tuesday, usually a time for rush hour traffic, but out here, on the edge of the city limits, where the suburbs bled into the dense pines, the road was empty. Judge Evelyn Vance tightened her grip on the leather steering wheel of her vintage Mercedes. She was 55 years old, with skin the color of deep mahogany and eyes that had seen every lie a criminal could conjure. Today was a big day. She was presiding over the high-profile corruption case of a local city councilman, a case that had half the city threatening her and the other half praying for her. She checked her rear-view mirror. Nothing but rain and grey sky. Then the lights flared. Blue and red strobe lights pierced the gloom, blindingly bright against the storm. Evelyn sighed, glancing at her speedometer. She was doing 45 in a 50 zone. She was careful. She had to be. In her position, she couldn't afford even a parking ticket, let alone a moving violation. She signaled and pulled over to the muddy shoulder, the gravel crunching beneath her tires. She cracked the window just an inch, letting the smell of ozone and wet pine seep into the warm cabin. In the side mirror, she saw the patrol car door open. 2 figures emerged. They weren't wearing raincoats. They moved with a swagger that didn't match the weather. Officer Daniel Thorne and his partner, Officer Brad Miller. Evelyn didn't know them personally, but she knew the type. Thorne was heavy-set, with a buzz cut and a neck that seemed to vanish into his shoulders. Miller was younger, wiry, with nervous hands that hovered too close to his holster. Thorne approached the driver's side, while Miller circled to the passenger side, his hand resting on the butt of his service weapon. "License and registration," Thorne barked, not even leaning down to look her in the eye. He just held out a wet, gloved hand. "Good morning, officer," Evelyn said, her voice calm, the same voice that commanded silence in a room of 300 people. "May I ask why I've been pulled over?" "I said, 'License and registration,'" Thorne shouted, slapping the roof of her car. "Do not make me ask you a 3rd time." Evelyn felt a cold prickle of unease. This wasn't standard procedure. "Officer, I am reaching for my purse on the passenger seat. I am informing you of my movements." "Watch her hands, Miller," Thorne yelled to his partner. I see him," Miller replied, his voice cracking. Evelyn moved slowly. She knew the statistics. She knew the reality. Being a judge didn't make her bulletproof. And right now, in this rain, she was just a black woman in a nice car with 2 agitated men with guns. As her fingers brushed the leather of her purse, Thorne suddenly ripped the door handle. It was locked. "Open the car! Get out of the vehicle!" Thorne screamed, drawing his weapon. "Officer, I haven't done anything wrong. I am a judge of the Superior Court. I don't care if you're the Queen of England. Get out or I will drag you out." Evelyn unlocked the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. She needed to de-escalate this. She stepped out into the rain, the cold water instantly soaking her silk blouse. She kept her hands raised, palms open. "My identification is in the purse," she said firmly. "My name is Evelyn Vance. If you run my plates, you will see—" "Turn around!" Thorne spun her roughly, slamming her chest against the side of her car. He kicked her legs apart. "Stop resisting." "I am not resisting," Evelyn gasped, the metal of the car biting into her cheek. "She's reaching! She's reaching for something!" Miller screamed from the other side of the car. He had panicked. He saw a shadow, a movement, a phantom threat. The world seemed to slow down. Evelyn turned her head, looking Thorne in the eye. She saw something there that terrified her more than the gun. She saw malice. He wasn't scared. He was enjoying this. "Wrong place, wrong time, lady," Thorne whispered, so low only she could hear. Then, chaos. Miller fired first. Bang! The back window of the Mercedes shattered. Thorne, reacting to his partner's panic, or perhaps seizing the opportunity he had been waiting for, stepped back and raised his weapon. Bang! Bang! 2 shots from close range. Evelyn felt a searing heat graze her temple, followed by a massive impact to her shoulder that spun her around. She collapsed into the mud, the cold water mixing with the warm blood spreading across her blouse. Darkness didn't take her. Shock did. She lay there, face down in the mud, her vision swimming. "Holy!" Miller's voice was trembling. Did we—" Thorne walked over. He nudged Evelyn's leg with his boot. She didn't move. She held her breath, forcing her body to go limp, a survival instinct kicking in from a place she didn't know she had. "She's done," Thorne said, his voice void of emotion. "You idiot, Miller. You fired too fast. She was reaching. I saw a gun." "She didn't have a gun, you moron. It was a phone." Thorne sighed, the sound of a zipper being pulled. "Doesn't matter now. We got to clean this up. Call dispatch. Tell them we had a suspect brandish a weapon. Shots fired. Suspect down." "What about the body?" "Leave her. EMS will take 20 minutes in this weather. She'll be bled out by then. We need to get our stories straight before the sergeant gets here." They walked back to their patrol car, the heavy doors slamming shut, sealing them in their bubble of safety. Evelyn Vance opened one eye. The rain washed the mud from her lashes. The pain in her shoulder was excruciating, a burning fire that threatened to make her scream, but she bit her lip until it bled. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of her shoulder, a through and through. The head wound was just a graze, bleeding heavily but superficial. She wasn't dead, but she was furious, and she had caught in 45 minutes. Evelyn waited until the patrol car's engine hummed, masking the sound of her movement. She dragged herself up, using the rear tire of her Mercedes for leverage. Her pristine suit was ruined, stained with mud and crimson. Her hair, usually pulled back in an immaculate bun, was matted to her skull. She didn't reach for her phone. She knew they were watching the mirrors. Instead, she crawled to the passenger side, keeping the body of the car between her and the officers. She opened the rear door, tumbled into the back seat, and stayed low. She reached under the seat and pulled out her emergency kit. She was a judge, but she was also the daughter of a combat medic. She grabbed a roll of gauze and a pressure bandage. With trembling hands, she packed the wound in her shoulder, wrapping it tight. The pain made black spots dance in her vision, but the adrenaline was a powerful drug. She checked her watch. 8:15 a.m. Her courthouse was 5 miles away. She heard the officers arguing in their car. They were distracted. They were already rehearsing the lie. She lunged. She had a weapon. "We feared for our lives." The same script she had heard 100 times in her own courtroom. Evelyn crawled into the driver's seat. She didn't turn on the ignition yet. She put the car in neutral. The road here was on a slight decline. She released the parking brake. The heavy German car began to roll silently through the rain. She let it roll for 100 yards, the tires whispering on the wet asphalt, drifting further away from the flashing blue lights behind her. Once she rounded the bend, hidden by a thick grove of pines, she turned the key. The engine roared to life. She floored it. She didn't go to the hospital. That's what a victim would do. Evelyn Vance wasn't a victim. She was the law, and today the law was coming for Officer Thorne and Officer Miller. Back at the scene, Thorne looked up, his eyes widening as he saw the empty spot where the Mercedes had been. "Where is the car?" Miller shrieked. "Daniel, where is the body?" Thorne cursed, slamming his hand on the steering wheel. "She drove off. How the hell did she drive off with 2 bullets in her? We have to go after her. She'll talk. She'll tell them everything." Thorne's face twisted into a sneer. "Relax. She's bleeding out. She's probably driving herself to St. Mary's Hospital. We'll meet her there. We'll finish the report before she gets out of surgery. If she survives, it's her word against ours." And who are they going to believe? 2 decorated officers, or an erratic woman who fled a crime scene? Thorne put the car in gear. "Let's go to the station first. We need to file the incident report immediately. Get ahead of the narrative." They had no idea. They drove to the precinct, high-fived the desk sergeant, and filed a report stating that an unidentified female suspect had fled after assaulting an officer. They laughed about it in the locker room as they changed into fresh uniforms for their court appearance. Yes, they had court that morning. A simple drug possession case. A slam dunk. They were going to testify against a young kid named Marcus, lie about finding crack in his pocket, and go home to drink beers. They walked into the courthouse at 8:50 a.m., feeling like kings. The metal detectors beeped. The guards nodded respectfully. They were the predators in a building full of prey. They made their way to Courtroom 4B. The bailiff, a man named Old Jerry, who had known Evelyn for 20 years, looked at them with a strange expression as they entered. The courtroom was packed. The air was thick, heavy with a tension that Thorne couldn't quite place. "All rise." Jerry's voice boomed, but it sounded shaky. Thorne and Miller stood up, smirking at each other. They expected Judge Harold Smith, an old, sleepy man who usually took their word as gospel. But the door behind the bench didn't open for Judge Smith. It opened, and a gasp ripped through the gallery. Walking through the door was not a sleepy old man. It was a woman. She was wearing her judicial robes, but they were thrown hastily over something else. Beneath the black silk, a white blouse was visible, stained a horrific, dark red. Her left arm was in a makeshift sling. Her hair was wet, wild, and plastered to her forehead. A bandage was taped over her temple, a stark white square against her skin. She walked slowly, every step a battle against pain. She climbed the 3 steps to the high bench. She didn't sit. She stood there, towering over the room, her eyes locking instantly onto the 2 officers in the front row. Officer Miller's knees buckled. He grabbed the table for support. It's her," he whispered, all the color draining from his face. "It's the driver." Thorne stopped breathing. His brain couldn't process the image. The woman he had shot, the woman he had left for dead in the mud. She wasn't just alive. She was the judge. Evelyn Vance picked up her gavel. She didn't bang it. She just held it, feeling its weight. She leaned into the microphone, her voice raspy, but amplifying through the silent room like the voice of God. "Be seated," she said. Nobody moved. I said, "Be seated." The room collapsed into chairs. Thorne and Miller remained standing, frozen, like deer in the headlights of a semi-truck. "Officers," Evelyn said, a cold smile touching her lips. "You seem surprised to see me. Were you expecting someone else? Perhaps a corpse?" The silence in Courtroom 4B was heavy enough to crush bones. The air conditioner hummed, a low drone that sounded like a countdown. Every eye in the gallery, defense attorneys, the defendant's family, the bored court reporter, darted between the blood-soaked judge and the two pale officers. Officer Daniel Thorne was sweating. He could feel a bead of perspiration trickling down his spine, cold as ice. He tried to speak, his voice cracking. Your Honor, you're injured. We should call a medic." "I've already called for assistance," Judge Vance said, her voice like grinding stones. She gestured to the bailiff, Jerry. "Jerry, lock the doors. No one leaves this room." Jerry, confused but loyal to the bone, marched to the double doors and threw the deadbolt. Click-clack, the sound echoed like a gunshot. "But, Your Honor," Thorne stammered, his arrogance evaporating into panic. "We have rights. If you are the victim, you can't preside over this." "I am not presiding over my case, Officer Thorne," Evelyn said, leaning forward. A fresh drop of blood fell from her temple onto the pristine mahogany desk. "I am presiding over your credibility." She picked up a file from her desk. It was the case of State versus Marcus Holloway. The young man Thorne and Miller were supposed to testify against that morning. Marcus sat at the defense table, eyes wide, looking from the cops to the judge. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that the monster in the uniform was afraid. "Officer Thorne," Evelyn said, opening the file, "take the stand." I object," Thorne shouted. "This is highly irregular." "Take the stand." Evelyn didn't shout. She didn't have to. The command vibrated through the floorboards. Thorne walked to the witness box, his legs stiff. He sat down. He looked at Miller, who was shaking in the front row, on the verge of vomiting. Thorne shot him a look that said, "Keep your mouth shut." "Raise your right hand," Evelyn commanded. Thorne did. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God." "I do," Thorne said, his jaw tight. "Good," Evelyn whispered. She winced as a spasm of pain shot through her shoulder, but she used the pain. It sharpened her focus. "Officer Thorne, let the record show that you filed an arrest report for Mr. Holloway, stating you found narcotics in his pocket at 7:30 a.m. this morning on 4th Street. "That is correct," Thorne lied. He had to stick to the script. "And immediately after that arrest," Evelyn continued, her eyes drilling into him, "where did you go?" Thorne hesitated. He knew the timeline was tight. We went on patrol. Route 9. Perimeter check." "Ah, Route 9, Evelyn said softly. "A lonely road. And did you encounter anyone on Route 9? Thorne licked his lips. He was trapped. If he admitted he saw her, he admitted to the shooting. If he denied it and she had proof, it was perjury. But he banked on the fact that she had no proof yet. Just her word. "We encountered a vehicle driving erratically," Thorne said, gaining a little confidence. "The suspect was aggressive, attempted to run us over. We followed protocol." "Protocol?" Evelyn repeated. "Did your protocol involve firing 3 rounds into an unarmed vehicle?" "The suspect had a weapon," Thorne blurted out. "My partner saw a gun." "A gun?" Evelyn said. She reached into her ruined purse, which sat next to the gavel. She pulled out her object. It wasn't a gun. It was a slim, shattered smartphone with a bullet hole through the corner of the case. "Is this the gun, officer?" Thorne stayed silent. "Answer me!" Evelyn slammed the gavel. The sound made Miller jump in his seat. "It looked like a gun in the low light," Thorne yelled back. "We feared for our lives. It was a split-second decision." "A split-second decision?" Evelyn mused. "And after you neutralized the threat, as I believe you called it in your dispatch report, did you check on the suspect? Did you render aid?" Thorne went pale. "The suspect fled. Drove off before we could approach." Evelyn smiled. It was a terrifying, bloodied smile. "You are lying, Officer Thorne. You walked up to the car. You looked through the window. You saw a woman bleeding into the leather seats. And you told your partner, what was it? She's done. Let her bleed out. The courtroom gasped. The defense attorney for Marcus Holloway stood up, sensing blood in the water. Your Honor, if this is true, I move for an immediate dismissal of all charges against my client. These officers are clearly compromised. Sit down, Counselor, Evelyn said. I'm not done with him. She turned back to Thorne. You left me to die in the mud because you didn't want the paperwork. You thought I was nobody. You didn't check my ID. You just saw a black woman in a luxury car and assumed you could do whatever you wanted. Thorne stood up, his face red with rage. This is a setup. You can't prove any of this. It's your word against two badges. I am a decorated officer of the law. You are a biased judge with a vendetta. Sit down, Jerry the bailiff barked, hand on his taser. I won't sit down, Thorne screamed. I'm leaving. Come on, Miller. He stepped out of the witness box. He thought he could bully his way out of the room. He thought the badge still protected him. Officer Thorne, Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than his shouting. Before you walk out that door, you should know one thing about my car. Thorne stopped. His hand was on the gate. He looked back. What? He sneered. It's a 2025 model, Evelyn said. Do you know what the Sentry Mode feature does? Thorne's eyes widened. The courtroom was frozen. The term Sentry Mode hung in the air like a guillotine blade waiting to drop. Evelyn tapped the laptop on her bench. She winced again, the adrenaline starting to fade, replaced by the throbbing ache of the bullet wound in her shoulder. She was losing blood, but she had enough strength for this one final blow. My vehicle, Evelyn explained, speaking to the court reporter now, ensuring every word was transcribed, is equipped with 8 exterior cameras and 360-degree audio recording. It uploads directly to a secure cloud server the moment an impact is detected. She turned the laptop screen around so the gallery and the officers could see. Impact detected at 8:12 a.m., Evelyn read. Glass breakage. Gunshot audio signature recognized. She pressed the spacebar. The video played on the small screen, but the audio was piped through the courtroom speakers. The quality was crystal clear. Crack of thunder. Sound of rain. Voice of Officer Thorne. Get out or I will drag you out. Voice of Evelyn. I am not resisting. Voice of Miller. She's reaching. Then the shots. Bang. 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 The video from the side mirror camera clearly showed Evelyn's hands up, empty, palms open. It showed Thorne stepping back, taking a shooter's stance, and firing with intent to kill. But the audio that followed was the nail in the coffin. Voice of Thorne through the speakers. She's done. You idiot, Miller. Leave her. EMS will take 20 minutes. She'll be bled out by then. We need to get our stories straight. The recording played on, capturing the sound of their boots crunching on gravel as they walked away, laughing about cleaning up the scene. Thorne stared at the laptop. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The badge on his chest, once his shield, now felt like a target. Officer Miller, sitting in the front row, broke. He didn't just cry, he wailed. He fell to his knees, putting his hands over his head. I told you, Daniel. I told you we should have called the ambulance. I didn't want to leave her. Shut up, Brad, Thorne hissed, looking around wildly for an exit. Officer Brad Miller, Evelyn said, her eyes softening slightly as she looked at the broken man. You are currently under oath by proximity. Are you confessing to a conspiracy to commit murder? Yes, Miller sobbed. Yes, he made me do it. He said we'd go to prison if she lived. I'm sorry, Judge. I'm so sorry. Thorne lunged. It happened fast. Thorne realized his career, his freedom, his life. It was all over. The animal instinct to fight took over. He reached for his service weapon. "Gun!" Jerry the bailiff shouted. But before Jerry could draw, before Thorne could even unsnap his holster, the courtroom doors burst open. The lock shattered inward. A SWAT team poured into the room, led by Captain David Ross, the precinct commander. Behind him was the district attorney, a stern woman named Sarah Jenkins, who had been on the phone with Evelyn during her drive to the courthouse. "Drop it, Thorne!" Captain Ross screamed, leveling an assault rifle at his own officer. "Drop it or I will drop you!" Thorne froze. He looked at the captain. He looked at the dozen laser sights dancing on his chest. He looked at Evelyn, who sat high above him, bleeding but unbroken. Slowly, agonizingly, Thorne took his hand off his weapon. He raised his hands. "Get on the ground," Ross commanded. Thorne went to his knees. 2 SWAT officers were on him instantly, zip-tying his hands behind his back, tighter than necessary. They ripped the badge off his chest. The Velcro sound was the most satisfying noise Evelyn had ever heard. "Daniel Thorne and Brad Miller," District Attorney Jenkins announced, stepping into the center of the room. "You are under arrest for attempted capital murder of a sitting judge, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and filing a false police report." Jenkins looked up at the bench. "Judge Vance. Evelyn. The paramedics are right outside. Please, let us help you now." Evelyn nodded, her vision finally starting to blur at the edges. The adrenaline was gone. The pain was washing over her like a tidal wave. "Court is adjourned," she whispered. She banged the gavel one last time. It fell from her hand, rolling across the desk. As the paramedics rushed in, loading her onto a stretcher, the entire courtroom, defendants, lawyers, witnesses, stood up. It wasn't a mandatory all rise. It was a standing ovation. But the story wasn't over. The arrest was just the beginning. Thorne wasn't the type of man to go down quietly. He had friends on the force. He had secrets. And from his jail cell, he was about to play one last desperate card that would shake the city to its core. The county jail was a concrete box that smelled of bleach, unwashed bodies, and despair. For a man like Daniel Thorne, who had spent 15 years putting people inside these walls, being on the other side of the bars was a special kind of hell. He was in administrative segregation, ad-seg, for his own protection. Cops didn't last long in general population. But Thorne wasn't sitting in his cell feeling remorse. He was pacing. He was plotting. 3 days had passed since the courtroom arrest. His bail had been denied. The video from Judge Vance's car had gone viral, racking up 50 million views in 48 hours. The world hated him. But Thorne knew how the system worked. Public outrage faded. Juries could be manipulated. Evidence could be lost. But he had a loose end. Officer Brad Miller. Miller was weak. Thorne knew that if Miller took a plea deal, he would sing like a canary. He would tell the DA about the other stops, the planted drugs, the stolen cash from previous busts. If Miller talked, Thorne wasn't looking at 20 years for attempted murder. He was looking at life without parole for a RICO case. Thorne waited for the night shift. He knew the guard on rotation, a man named Officer Griggs. Griggs had a gambling problem, and Thorne had covered for him twice when money went missing from the evidence locker. "Griggs," Thorne whispered through the food slot of his steel door. The heavy boots stopped. Griggs looked around nervously. "I can't talk to you, Daniel. The warden is watching everyone." "I don't need you to talk," Thorne hissed. "I need you to deliver a message to the terrifying gentleman in cell block D. You know who I mean. Little Rico." "Are you crazy? Rico wants you dead." "Rico wants money," Thorne corrected. "Tell him I have 50 grand stashed in a safety deposit box. My lawyer has the key. It's his if he does one favor for me." "What favor?" "Miller is in the infirmary wing, on suicide watch. He's unguarded for 10 minutes during the shift change at 3:00 a.m. Tell Rico to make it look like Miller finally succeeded in hanging himself." Griggs hesitated, sweat beading on his forehead. "If this comes back to me, it won't. Just pass the message. Or do you want the Internal Affairs Bureau to find out about that missing cocaine from last year?" Griggs paled. He nodded once and walked away. Thorne sat back on his cot and smiled. He closed his eyes, imagining the problem disappearing. Meanwhile, at St. Mary's Hospital, Judge Evelyn Vance was fighting a different battle. She was sitting up in bed, her left arm immobilized in a complex sling. The surgery to repair the nerve damage in her shoulder had taken 6 hours. The doctors said she would regain 90% mobility, but the ache would likely never leave her. District Attorney Sarah Jenkins sat in the chair next to the bed, looking exhausted. "We have Miller," Jenkins said, rubbing her temples. "He's terrified. He's ready to cut a deal. He'll testify that you weren't the first victim, Evelyn. They've been doing this for years, targeting minority drivers, escalating situations, planting evidence to cover their tracks. They ran a gang with badges." "I want them all," Evelyn said, her voice weak but firm. "Not just Thorne and Miller. I want the sergeant who signed the false reports. I want the internal affairs officers who looked the other way." "We're building the case," Jenkins promised, "but Thorne has hired Marcus Blackwood." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Marcus Blackwood was a legendary defense attorney. He was known as the Shark. He cost $1,000 an hour and had never lost a high-profile case. He was famous for destroying victims on the stand, twisting their words until the jury believed the victim was the criminal. "He'll claim self-defense," Evelyn predicted. "He'll say the video is misleading. He'll say the angle makes it look like I was surrendering when I was actually reaching." "Let him try," Jenkins said. Suddenly, Jenkins's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, and her face went white. "What is it?" Evelyn asked. "It's the jail," Jenkins gasped. "There was an incident. Officer Miller." Evelyn sat up, ignoring the pain. "Is he dead?" "No," Jenkins said, reading the text rapidly. "Someone tried to get into his cell in the infirmary. An inmate named Rico. But this is unbelievable." "What?" "Miller wasn't in the cell," Jenkins said, looking up with a stunned expression. "He had been moved an hour earlier. My investigator, Detective Lewis, had a bad feeling. He pulled Miller out of the county jail and moved him to a federal safe house without logging it in the system." Evelyn let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "Rico walked into an empty cell," Jenkins continued, "and he was caught on camera holding a shiv made from a toothbrush. He's already flipping on Thorne. He told the guards Thorne paid him to do it." Evelyn smiled. It was the first genuine smile she had cracked in days. Thorne just added solicitation of capital murder to his charge sheet. "He's digging his own grave," Jenkins agreed. "No," Evelyn corrected, looking out the window at the city skyline. "He's not digging, he's drowning, and I'm going to be the one to hold his head under the water." 6 months later. The path to the Superior Court was lined with news vans. Protesters stood on one side of the street, holding signs that read, "Justice for Judge Vance," while a smaller, angry group on the other side held signs supporting the police, claiming Thorne was a hero being scapegoated. The atmosphere inside the courtroom was electric. It was the same room where Evelyn usually presided, but today she sat at the prosecutor's table, not the bench. The judge presiding was the Honorable Justice Samuel P. Carter, a stern, no-nonsense jurist brought in from a neighboring state to ensure impartiality. Daniel Thorne sat at the defense table. He had lost weight, his buzz cut had grown out, and he wore a tailored grey suit that made him look like a banker, not a killer. Beside him was Marcus Blackwood, a man with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. District Attorney Jenkins gave an opening statement that moved the jury to tears. She painted a picture of a public servant gunned down in the rain, left to die like an animal. Then Blackwood stood up. He didn't use a podium. He walked right up to the jury box, leaning on the railing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Blackwood began, his voice smooth as velvet. "Context is everything. You will see a video. It looks bad. I admit that. But a video doesn't show you fear. A video doesn't show you the threat profile of the area. Officer Thorne is a hero who made a split-second decision in a war zone. The prosecution wants you to believe he is a monster. I will prove to you he is just a man who wanted to go home to his family." The trial lasted 2 weeks. The prosecution played the video. They played the audio. They brought in the ballistics experts who testified that Evelyn was shot while turning away. They brought in Brad Miller. Miller, looking small and broken in an orange jumpsuit, he was serving time for his part in the corruption, pointed a shaking finger at Thorne. "He told me to leave her." Miller wept on the stand. "He said she was nobody. He laughed about it." Blackwood tore into Miller on cross-examination. "You're a liar, aren't you, Mr. Miller? You're testifying to save your own skin? You'd say anything to get a reduced sentence, wouldn't you?" Miller stammered, looking weak. Blackwood was good. He was planting doubt. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. "The prosecution calls Evelyn Vance," Jenkins announced. The room went silent. Evelyn stood up. She wore a simple navy blue suit. She walked to the stand with a slight limp, a permanent reminder of the day she almost died. She took the oath. She sat down. For the first hour, she answered Jenkins' questions clearly. She described the fear, the pain, the cold mud. She described the look in Thorne's eyes. Then Marcus Blackwood stood up for cross-examination. He buttoned his jacket. He prowled toward her like a wolf circling a wounded deer. "Ms. Vance," Blackwood started, deliberately not using her title. "You are a judge. You know the law. Yet, on the morning in question, you were speeding, were you not?" "I was going with the flow of traffic, though there was no traffic," Evelyn said calmly. "You admit you broke the law," Blackwood said, "and when the officers approached, you locked your doors. You refused to exit. Is that the behavior of an innocent person, or someone with something to hide? It is the behavior of a woman alone on a deserted road who feels threatened by 2 aggressive men," Evelyn countered. "Threatened?" Blackwood laughed. "By police officers? Ms. Vance, you have a history of ruling against police in your courtroom, don't you? You have a bias." "Objection!" Jenkins shouted. "Sustained," Judge Carter ruled. "Move on, Mr. Blackwood." Blackwood leaned in close. "Let's talk about the phone you reached for. In the rain, in the dark. It looks like a gun. Can you admit, Ms. Vance, that to a terrified officer, that object could resemble a firearm?" Evelyn looked Blackwood in the eye. "Mr. Blackwood, Officer Thorne was not terrified. He was bored." "Objection! Speculation!" Blackwood snapped. "I withdrew it," Evelyn said, cutting him off. "But I will answer your question about the phone. I wasn't reaching for it to make a call. I was reaching for it to activate the recording app. Because from the moment Officer Thorne walked up to my window, I knew he wasn't looking for a driver's license. He was looking for a victim." "You provoked him!" Blackwood shouted, losing his cool for the first time. "You acted entitled. You thought your badge made you better than him." "My badge represents the law." Evelyn's voice rose, filling the room with the authority she had commanded for 20 years. His badge represents the enforcement of that law. When he fired 3 bullets into an unarmed woman, he didn't just try to kill me. He tried to kill the very concept of justice. And looking at you, counselor, trying to justify attempted murder with cheap victim-blaming tactics, it seems he isn't the only one trying to kill it. The courtroom erupted. Blackwood, stunned, stepped back. He looked at the jury. He saw their faces. They weren't buying it. He had pushed too hard. He had tried to bully a woman who had faced down murderers and cartel bosses. No further questions, Blackwood muttered, retreating to his table. Evelyn stepped down from the stand. As she walked past the defense table, she caught Thorne's eye. He wasn't sneering anymore. He was trembling. The trial concluded with closing arguments. The jury went out to deliberate. Usually, in a case this complex, deliberations could take days. Everyone prepared for the long haul. The media pundits speculated on the news channels. Would a jury convict a cop? Would the self-defense argument work? But they didn't have to wait days. They didn't even have to wait hours. 45 minutes later, the buzzer in the courtroom sounded. Jerry the bailiff, who was back at his post, looked at Evelyn and winked. They're back. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs, just as hard as it had on that rainy highway. This was it, the moment of truth. The jury filed in. They refused to look at the defense table. That was always the sign. Have you reached a verdict? Judge Carter asked. The jury foreman, a middle-aged school teacher, stood up. He held a piece of paper with shaking hands. We have, Your Honor. Publish the verdict. The atmosphere inside courtroom 4B had shifted. For 2 weeks, the air had been thick with the frantic energy of arguments, objections, and the click-clack of the stenographer's machine. But now, as the heavy oak doors swung open to admit the jury, the room fell into a silence so profound it felt like a vacuum. The only sound was the hum of the central air conditioning and the sharp intake of breath from Daniel Thorne. Thorne sat at the defense table, his expensive grey suit now feeling like a straitjacket. He drummed his fingers on the table, a nervous tic he couldn't control. He looked at the jury as they filed in, one by one. He tried to catch their eyes, to find a sympathetic glance, a hint of mercy, but they didn't look at him. Juror number 4, a grandmother who had smiled at him on day 1, now stared resolutely at the floor. The foreman, a high school history teacher, clutched the verdict form against his chest as if it were a shield. Thorne leaned toward his attorney, Marcus Blackwood. "Why aren't they looking at me, Marcus?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "That's bad, isn't it? Tell me that's not bad." Blackwood didn't answer. He was already snapping the locks on his briefcase shut. He knew. In 20 years of criminal defense, the look away was the only sign that mattered. The shark was already mentally calculating his billing hours and moving on to the next client. "All right," the bailiff, Jerry, announced. His voice lacked its usual boom. It was solemn, heavy. Judge Samuel P. Carter swept onto the bench. He adjusted his glasses, his face a mask of impartial granite. "Be seated," he commanded. The room settled, the rustle of clothing sounding like dry leaves. "Mr. Foreman," Judge Carter said, his voice echoing slightly in the stillness. "Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" The foreman stood up. His hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled. "We have, Your Honor." "Please publish the verdict." Thorne stopped breathing. The world narrowed down to the foreman's lips. "In the case of the state versus Daniel Thorne," the foreman began, his voice cracking before finding its strength, "on the charge of attempted murder in the first degree." He paused, a heartbeat that lasted a lifetime. "We find the defendant guilty." A gasp rippled through the gallery, a release of tension held for months. Thorne flinched violently, as if physically struck. He opened his mouth to protest, but the foreman wasn't finished. On the charge of conspiracy to commit capital murder, guilty. On the charge of filing a false police report, guilty. On the charge of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, guilty. On the charge of obstruction of justice, guilty. 5 counts, 5 guilties. It was a clean sweep, a total annihilation. Thorne slumped back in his chair, the blood draining from his face until he looked like a wax figure. He turned to Blackwood, clutching the attorney's sleeve. "Do something. Object. Mistrial. You said you could fix this." Blackwood gently but firmly removed Thorne's hand from his arm. "The jury has spoken, Daniel. It's over." Judge Carter silenced the murmuring crowd with a sharp rap of his gavel. He turned his gaze upon Thorne. It wasn't a look of anger, but of profound disappointment. "Daniel Thorne," Judge Carter said. Normally the court would schedule a sentencing hearing for a later date, allowing time for pre-sentencing reports and character witness statements. Carter took off his glasses and set them on the bench. "However," the judge continued, "this court has heard the audio of you laughing while a woman bled into the mud. We have seen the video of you planting evidence. We have heard the testimony of your partner regarding your attempt to have a witness murdered in county jail. I do not believe there is any character witness on this earth who could alter the court's perception of your soul. I am prepared to sentence you now. Do you have anything to say?" Blackwood started to stand, perhaps to object to the speed, but Thorne grabbed the table and hauled himself up. He was desperate. He was drowning. "Your Honor," Thorne stammered, tears spilling onto his cheeks, tears of self-pity, not remorse. I was afraid. The video, it looks bad, I know. But out there on the road, it's a war zone. I have a family. I have a little girl. I've served this city for 15 years. I'm not a bad man. I just made a mistake. Please, don't take my life away. Mercy? I'm asking for mercy." The courtroom held its breath. Evelyn Vance, sitting at the prosecution table, didn't move. She watched Thorne with the same clinical detachment she used to view evidence. She saw him not as a monster, but as a small, pathetic man who had finally run out of power. Judge Carter stared at Thorne for a long moment. "Mercy," he repeated, tasting the word. "You ask for the one thing you refused to give." Carter leaned forward, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. "You speak of the road being a war zone, but the only person waging war on Route 9 that morning was you. You waged war on an innocent woman. You waged war on the Constitution. You speak of your 15 years of service. That makes your crime worse, Mr. Thorne. You knew better. You were sworn to protect the vulnerable, and instead, you hunted them." The judge picked up his pen, hovering it over the docket. "You treated the badge like a crown that made you a king. But you are not a king. You are a convict," Carter wrote as he spoke, the scratching of the pen audible on the microphone. "Daniel Thorne, on count 1, attempted murder. I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." Thorne let out a guttural sound like a dying animal. "On count 2, Carter continued relentlessly, 25 years. On the remaining counts, 10 years each. And because I believe you remain a distinct danger to society, these sentences shall run consecutively, not concurrently. You will never walk free again." "No!" Thorne screamed, his legs giving out. He collapsed toward the floor, held up only by the table. "You can't do this. I'm a cop. You can't put me in there with them. They'll kill me. I need ADSEG. I need protection. The Department of Corrections will assess your housing needs." Carter said coldly. "But as of this moment, you are no longer a police officer. You are inmate number 8940. Carter banged the gavel. The sound was like a thunderclap, finalizing the storm that had started months ago on a rainy highway. "Remand the defendant into custody immediately." Two bailiffs stepped forward. These were men Thorne had barbecued with, men he had shared beers with after shifts. Now their faces were hard. They didn't see a friend. They saw a stain on their uniform. They grabbed Thorne by the arms, none too gently. "Get your hands off me!" Thorne shrieked, struggling as they dragged him backward. He looked wildly around the room, locking eyes with Evelyn Vance. Evelyn held his gaze. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply raised her eyebrows slightly, a silent message that said, "I told you." "Blackwood!" Thorne screamed as he was hauled toward the steel side door. "Call the governor! Call someone!" The heavy door slammed shut, cutting off his wails abruptly. The silence that followed was heavy, but clean. It was the feeling of an infection being lanced. Evelyn stood up slowly. Her shoulder ached, a deep, throbbing reminder of the bullet that had shattered her bone. But she stood tall. She turned to Sarah Jenkins, the district attorney. "Thank you, Sarah," Evelyn whispered. "We didn't do anything," Jenkins replied, closing her files. "You did this. You survived." But the story wasn't quite over. Karma, as Evelyn knew, was thorough. 3 months later. The news cycle had moved on, but the legal system had not. Daniel Thorne was rotting in a maximum security facility 3 hours north. He was in solitary confinement for his own protection, spending 23 hours a day in a concrete box the size of a bathroom. But Evelyn Vance wasn't finished with him. She had filed a civil lawsuit the week after the criminal verdict. Thorne, naturally, couldn't attend. He had no lawyer. Blackwood had vanished the moment the checks stopped clearing. In a quiet civil courtroom, a default judgment was entered against Daniel Thorne for $10 million in damages. Of course, Thorne didn't have $10 million, but he had assets. Evelyn watched from the back of the room as the court orders were signed. Everything Thorne had built on the back of his corruption was stripped away. His house in the suburbs, seized and sold. His brand new pickup truck, auctioned. His boat, gone. His wife, humiliated and horrified by the revelations of his double life, had filed for divorce and taken full custody of their daughter. She didn't want a dime of his dirty money, but the final blow was the one that hurt him the most. Evelyn's legal team had utilized a little-known state statute, the Public Trust Forfeiture Clause. It mandated that any public servant convicted of a felony in the line of duty forfeited their entire pension. Thorne had $2 million in pension benefits waiting for him. It was his nest egg. It was the only thing that would have allowed him to buy candy bars, ramen, and extra blankets at the prison commissary. With the strike of a pen, it was gone. Evelyn directed that every penny recovered from the liquidation of Thorne's assets be donated to the Legal Aid Defense Fund, a charity that provided free lawyers to poor minorities who had been falsely accused by corrupt police officers. It was the ultimate irony. Daniel Thorne's life savings would now be used to defend the very people he had spent his career victimizing. A cool autumn breeze swept through the city streets as Judge Evelyn Vance walked up the marble steps of the Superior Court. It was her first day back on the bench. She paused at the entrance, looking at the spot where the news vans had swarmed just a few months ago. Now it was just pigeons and pedestrians. Life had returned to normal. She touched her temple. The scar was there, hidden beneath a layer of foundation, but she could feel the ridge of skin. She liked it. It was a reminder. She walked through the metal detectors, greeting the guards by name. They stood a little straighter when they saw her. There was a new respect in their eyes, a mixture of awe and fear. They knew now, you do not mess with Judge Vance. She entered her chambers and put on her black robe. It felt heavy, comforting, like a suit of armor. She walked into courtroom 4B. "All rise," Jerry shouted, his face splitting into a wide grin as he saw her. The entire courtroom stood, attorneys, clerks, and the public. Evelyn climbed the 3 steps to her high-backed leather chair. She sat down, feeling the familiarity of the wood and leather. She looked out over her domain. In the front row, a young rookie police officer was chewing gum, looking bored, leaning back in his chair with his feet on the rail. Evelyn reached out and picked up her gavel. She didn't slam it. She just tapped it, once. A sharp, clear sound that cut through the room. The rookie jumped, his gum falling out of his mouth. He scrambled to sit up straight, his face turning red. Evelyn locked eyes with him. She lowered her glasses, staring him down until he looked away, terrified. "Officer," she said, her voice calm, resonant, and filled with the power of a woman who had walked through fire and come out the other side. "Welcome to my courtroom. In here we sit up straight, we respect the process, and above all else, we tell the truth." She opened the file in front of her. "Let's get to work." And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of how one corrupt officer made the biggest mistake of his life by underestimating the wrong woman. Daniel Thorne thought his badge made him a god, but he forgot that a badge is just a piece of metal. It doesn't protect you from the truth. Judge Evelyn Vance proved that no one is above the law, not even the people enforcing it. Thorne is currently serving life in prison, and thanks to Evelyn's civil suit, every penny he ever earned is now funding a scholarship for underprivileged law students. Talk about poetic justice. What would you have done if you were in Evelyn's shoes? Would you have had the courage to record the encounter, or would you have frozen? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of intense drama and instant karma, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. We upload thrilling sagas every week. Thanks for watching, and remember, the truth always wins.